A very good morning to all. I am Pankti Goel, Senior Assistant Director Economic Research at FIPI. As we all are aware that over the years, FIPI, for the benefit of industry as well as academia, has been organizing various webinars and conducting studies with the focus on refining, marketing, clean energy transition, and many other varied topics pertaining to interest and development of oil and gas sector. In the same context, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all our participants today at the exclusive webinar organized by FIPI along with EY on green hydrogen. To commence our discussion for the day, I would like to invite Mr. DLN Shastri, Director, Oil Refining and Marketing at FIPI, to formally welcome all the participants and set the context for the session.
Thank you, Pankuri. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Team from EY, Shri Vivekanand, Director of Finance, Taxation and Legal from FIPI, and all the participants from the industry, a very good morning to all of you. My warm welcome to all the participants. In fact, we have about 700 participants registered for this. I'm very sure most of them will be joining during the course of the time, while by now I think about 80 have joined to this exclusive webinar organized by FIPI along with EY on green hydrogen. Acknowledging the climate emergency and the need for combating climate change, oil and gas industry today is transitioning towards clean energy initiatives and opportunities to become environmentally sustainable. Among the technologies that oil and gas companies are particularly pursuing to capitalize on are deployment of renewable options like wind, solar. Besides capital-intensive clean hydrogen, clean technologies like green hydrogen and CCUS. So the policies and targets adopted by Indian government, such as 500 gigawatt non-fossil fuel electricity capacity by 2030, FAME 2, National Biofuel Policy are all in this right direction to decarbonize the nation. And further supplementing this with ongoing efforts on 75th Independence Day, Honorable Prime Minister made an announcement of a national hydrogen mission with an aim for making India a hub for production and export of green hydrogen. So this ambitious goal is to make India energy independent before the country completes 100 years of independence in 2047. So this policy has set a target of about 5 million tons per annum of green hydrogen production by 2030. And therefore, fuels like green hydrogen and green ammonia shall be vital for the energy security of the country. Government is also working on, through MNRE, they are working towards mandating some industry segments, particularly including, it will obviously include oil and gas also. For production of green hydrogen, there will be some component of hydrogen that will be mandated as a green hydrogen, and oil industry will have to gear up to this challenge, and it is likely to come anytime soon. And India has already committed to achieving net zero carbon emission by 2070, with that being the target. And the green hydrogen will play definitely a significant role as a feedstock in India's transition from fossil fuels. So India at this crucial juncture in terms of its energy landscape and green hydrogen plans has a critical role to play to make the nation self-reliant and energy independent. So it is need of the hour for hydrocarbon industry as per FIPI to have an expert consulting firms like EY to deliberate on various options available globally in terms of technology readiness, in terms of viability aspects, and what are the desired policy interventions so that these options will make national targets achievable. In this regard, we at FIPI are very happy to associate ourselves with EY and engage the industry members on these deliberations. And we are particularly very happy with the overwhelming response we have got to this call for this webinar from so many participants. And so without taking further time, I once again welcome all of you and look forward to the discussions with our experts, EY on green hydrogen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have an esteemed set of speakers amongst us today. Mr. Kapil Bansal, partner at EY. He has more than 20 years of experience in the energy environment sector across technology, due diligence, low carbon growth strategies, climate change and decarbonization, new energies like hydrogen, air quality, etc. Mr. Emil Thomas, senior manager with 12 years of experience in its operations and strategy roles across industries, primarily in the energy and resource sectors. Ms. Neetu Vinaya, partner at EY. She is the leader of oil and gas and infrastructure sector at EY India from a tax and regulatory perspective. She has more than 2 decades of experience in advising multinational clients in the field of direct tax. And Mr. Bhavesh Thakkar, partner at EY. He is in the tax and regulatory services with special focus on incentives and subsidies and has 23 years of professional experience. Now, before we begin with the presentation, I would like to request all the participants to put forward their questions to all our panelists in the given Q&A box, and we'll be taking up those questions post the discussion today. Over to you, EY team.
Thanks, Pankuri. Am I audible?
Yes.
Excellent. Emil, would you be the screen, or we would have the team from FI sharing?
Yeah, Kapil, the screen has been presented. I guess you can start. Yeah.
I hope it's all visible. Yeah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. I don't know why Zoom is crashing for me time and again, so that's why I've been just checking once again. So, good morning, everyone. Kapil Bansal this side. I'm going to just quickly talk about some of the elements that we found. Hello. Am I still audible?
Yes.
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, because my screen has frozen. That's why I was just.
Yeah, screen is frozen. That's why I'm also wondering why it is frozen.
Understood. So good. We'll continue with our discussion. As I mentioned, as been introduced, 21 years of overall experience at EY. I'm looking after the overall energy transition and decarbonization practice. On the energy transition, one of the key areas that we've been extensively working is looking at the new energies and the clean fuels. So in the new energy side, we also look for renewable energies, and on the fuel side, green hydrogen as a major element of both from the heat as well as from the perspective of it stock element. We'll speak about some of that elements as we go through in our overall discussion, but definitely we'll first focus more on hydrogen at the heart of net zero. So if we move to the next slide, Emil, if you're presenting the next slide. Hello.
Yes, Kapil. I hope my screen's visible.
Yes. I think there's some bandwidth issue with Mr. Kapil Bansal.
Mr. Kapil, you can go ahead. We can view the screen.
I think there is some problem with his connection.
Kapil is just rejoining. Just give him 10 seconds.
Sorry, I'm back. I had some issue with my Zoom. It crashed again. So I was speaking about, I'm going to speak more on the hydrogen at the heart of net zero. And in that, once we look for hydrogen in the overall oil and gas sector, we see, four definite elements that are driving a focus around hydrogen. While on an overall basis, whether it is India or globally, the need for energy is going to be continuously there, and it is going to grow. From an overall perspective, from a global, there are four key elements that we look for. There has been a diversification from a supply perspective of options that we have, both conventional and non-conventional. When we say conventional is your fossil fuel base, and unconventional is your supply from renewables, leading to electrons moving to molecules, and molecules could be in the form of hydrogen or its derivatives. So there is a complex derivative diversifications towards the supply side. While we look for on the demand, there is a continuous focus there on customer looking for various services that can be looked and met their demand outside purely from a hydrocarbon perspective. And while demand and supply has its own variations, there has been continuous pressure from the stakeholders
I think we're not here getting you. Actually, your voice is getting broken. Mr. Kapil, there seems to be some problem with your connection again.
Can I request a member from EY team to please carry forward the presentation? Some other member can take forward.
Sure. So while Kapil joins, I hope I'm audible. I'll probably just take it forward from here.
Yeah, you are audible.
Yes, thank you so much. As Kapil was just mentioning, it's a combination of different factors that have come together where we reach this stage of disruption happening in the sector, right? So you have both the supply and demand side that Kapil spoke about. There's also pressure from stakeholders, and regulators in order to reshape the industry's path, and especially low carbon commitments. Shastri sir talked about the 27 net zero goal that India has set for itself. So those are things that is driving this sort of disruption in the sector. And obviously technology, the advances in AI, digital and all are, an added impetus, right? So while the sector is sort of evolving and transitioning, various oil companies and NOCs all have set targets for themselves in terms of net zero, or in terms of reducing costs and operational efficiencies, right? So on the screen are a few names with announced net zero targets, right? Obviously these are global. There are Indian companies also who have announced such targets in that domain, in line with India's goal of 2070 as well. Obviously this is all feeding into people looking at different alternatives in terms of fuels, right? So you have the typical fossil fuel, but then there are alternatives that are becoming attractive, and there are a new generation of customers who are willing to pay for, even though slightly more expensive, but lower carbon fuels, right? So you see gray hydrogen being taken over by green hydrogen, other fossil fuel alternatives sort of becoming more and more attractive. And it is in this context that we see the hydrogen transition happening, right? So hydrogen has become a go-to alternative for decarbonization, right? It's especially so for hard to abate sectors, like transportation, heavy duty transportation, power storage, steel, refining, cement, and the like, right? So when you look at hydrogen as an alternative, it is both hydrogen as a feedstock itself, as well as hydrogen as ammonia as a carrier vector, as a secondary energy vector, both refineries and fertilizers in hard to abate sectors like steel, refining, cement, in terms of heavy duty mobility and shipping, and as a form of storage as well, right? So it is fast becoming an alternative fuel or a go-to fuel for industries that are looking at decarbonization in a very, very sort of serious way, right? And if you look at the sort of value chain for hydrogen and the sort of ecosystem that comes with it, right? It's slightly complex. There's the entire, chain from energy source to hydrogen generation to conversion to molecule to distribution to end use, right? So across each of these, there are different capabilities that are required. There are different players that will come into, and obviously it's a partnership of all these elements that build a robust hydrogen ecosystem, right? I see Kapil has joined back, so Kapil, do pitch in when required. But I was just talking about how the hydrogen ecosystem is quite complex, and there are multiple phases and areas that we need to look at, and a collaboration of both the industry players, the end users, as well as the suppliers of the energy, as well as the storage, as well as the hydrogen molecules and its derivatives like methanol or ammonia, will sort of come together in order to make this ecosystem robust, right? Kapil, if you want to pitch in, I think you're on mute.
Okay, no, absolutely. As we speak, while the hydrogen ecosystem is complex, it is in existence from last 40, 50 years. But it was mostly focused on the refineries and fertilizers. But as we see the adoption of hydrogen across the utilization in the industry, mobility, the power as well as storage section, there is a lot of use cases, and it requires an integration across the value chain from the renewable sites to your end use customer. So I think that's the key pointer on the overall value chain, and it is obviously very complex. And hydrogen, as such, the lightest molecule, requires a lot of norms, safety, and operational elements to be looked into from the overall value chain perspective. So we do cover from our work with our clients in understanding from the whole source of energy to the end use application. So we look for understanding of end use applications by each sector, whether it is chemicals, steel, data centers, even pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, refineries. Each of these have a different set of use cases across the process value chain. And based upon that, we also define where it can be utilized in the overall, perspective on a techno-commercial basis. So with that, mind in our working with clients, we work with different set of clients. If we move to the next slide, we, as EY, has been focusing upon helping clients build the overall hydrogen ecosystems from number of years across number of clients, which covers policymakers to help them define what kind of policies are needed to activate the hydrogen ecosystem build out. We are working with investor community who's building a lot of platforms. Obviously, the end industrial companies who wants the usage of hydrogen in their operations, either in the form of feedstock or in the form of heat or substitution of alternatives that they've been using. Obviously, energy, oil and gas companies, and most of the companies, if you look at from an oil and gas perspective, have transitioned from a pure play oil and gas to energy, which covers the three elements in our vectors, which is the electricity, the heat, as well as the kinetic towards the transportation. For all of that reasons, most of the oil and gas companies are looking for the new transitions that they have adopted in the last few years. And then this transition is going to be very predominantly seen, and which we'll cover in the next section, working with a lot of developers and other players in the overall perspective across the value chain, and helping them defining their business transformation, IT and digital adoptions on the overall basis, along with what we will hear, the advocacies that we have done on the policy regulation, as well as the international growth perspective. So now moving in terms of how the oil and gas sector as such has pivoted and looking for hydrogen. So the first thing is to look from the three dilemma that each company is significantly facing. They have to ensure from wherever their operations are. Most of the global and national oil companies are having a global supply chain, and they need to ensure the security of the demand as well as the system without any disruptions. We have seen multiple disruptions in the industries since the globalization has been the factor which we saw due to COVID, or because of the raw material availability from the geopolitical issues. So energy security is on the top agenda, and India always have secured its energy requirement. But at the same time, there is a discussion continuously on getting this energy in an equity basis, which is where we talk about universal access to reliable and affordable energy. Because for India, almost 160 to 170 billion dollars are spent on importing energy. So we need to ensure that how we can get the reliable sources at the same time in a most affordable basis, and put together as India has laid down and what Mr. Shastri just mentioned, that 2070 is the net zero goal of India. At the same time, in an immediate basis of 2030, we are looking for 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide reduction, which needs complete environmental sustainability and focus towards renewables and low carbon energy sources, and hydrogen plays a role. Because of these three energy trilemma, there has been 4 key mega trends that we observe. One is the massive redeployment of capital that is happening as we speak. So if you look at globally, in the overall energy setup, $2.4 trillion have been invested, out of which now 65% has been invested on non-conventional basis, which is your e-mobility side, your renewable side, your energy efficiencies, as well as the clean energy sources of green hydrogen. And that's where we see also a lot of unprecedented focus by the governments towards supporting the development of low carbon technologies, balancing operational excellence and the future growth perspective of the business. A lot of this has been supported with the availability of data, and data is becoming a new core assets, because more the data is available. With the compliance perspective, there is more ask from the stakeholders and customers towards ensuring that the shareholder value of the companies are maintained by their focus on all the 3 elements in a most balanced manner, with both the tailwinds towards the low carbon side and the headwinds towards how to manage the capital flow. And all this can only be supported by the availability of resources. And one of the critical resources is the skills and the cultures of each individual companies in this new era of energy transition for tomorrow. Having said that, when we look for from an overall nation's perspective, almost 93 countries who have made a commitment towards net zero, amidst almost 79% of emissions. And most of these countries has given 2050 as the target. And at EY, we manage a complete tracker on the carbon policies, carbon regulations, as well as what kind of investment they are doing. And if you look from this map, which I'm sure Neetu and Bhavesh are going to talk more from an India perspective, but when we look globally, almost $1 trillion of subsidies have been introduced across the geography. And very important one in this is the US Inflation Reduction Act, which allocates almost roughly approximately $69 billion towards the greener technologies, inclusive of green hydrogen. And there is a lot of talk about green hydrogen falling below $1 level even before it hits the cost parity with the alternatives because of this US IRA. With that, it has brought a lot in focus by other countries. EU bringing on their additionalities, each country in the EU bringing their own incentives. Australia recently announced almost $2.5 billion in terms of support towards green hydrogen, while they have already allocated $300 million on the low carbon side of it. We are expecting more regulations on the low carbon side coming from Japan, Korea, while most of these countries that we talk about already have their emission trading schemes to ensure that there is a viability towards the near adoption of technologies. So while we speak from an overall country perspective, definitely, to support these countries, the major oil companies have been the driving force towards the energy transition. And as we see, almost all the major oil and gas companies, which is a misnomer now, they have now been called themselves as energy companies, have increased their investments from what used to be the conventional sectors of upstream, midstream, downstream into a more energy transition, and there is an almost 10-fold increase over last 7 years in the new areas. And as you see, low carbon hydrogen has become a prominent area. We'll speak few of the case studies over the course of our discussion, and specifically on the green hydrogen side of it. While we know that solar has become below cost parity from the conventional coal basis. So the two technologies which has predominantly in the radars of each company is the investment on the green hydrogen side / blue hydrogen, supported by by we speak about blue hydrogen comes naturally the carbon capture of it. So almost if you look at from companies, BP has made a roughly 83% increase, and Petrobras, a national oil company, which is an equivalent of ours in case of Indian Oil, have made almost 3x increase in their capital investment towards what they used to invest in conventional basis to the low carbon initiatives or green initiatives covering EVs, renewables, and hydrogen put together. So that definitely talks about how the transition for the net zero is predominantly driven by the energy companies of today, which will take the future in terms of driving this. And this cannot be done in isolation. And that's what we have been observing, that most of these companies, if we move to the next slide, are working upon building a complete understanding of ecosystem through partnership model. We saw, and Emil did mention about the overall hydrogen ecosystem. So most of these companies on the energy transition side, because they have been focused conventionally on the conventional oil production side of it. But when you come for a newer technology like green hydrogen, the critical element is to look for the necessary partnership, whether it is partnership with the customers. And if you look at the NEOM green hydrogen project, there is a three-way partnership, one with the renewable player, which is Aqua. There is an the EPC player, and your finally the off-taker, which is the air products, all put together have come together to create the green hydrogen ecosystem in the Saudi Arabia, which is the first FID at the scale that we have seen. ThyssenKrupp, our own L&T as an EPC provider for the transmission, is working towards executing. So the partnership is coming from three factors. One, the technology partnership. The second is on the partnership towards the customer side, who is ensuring the offtake and the risk distribution. And the third element is also the kind of investment that needs to come through for such kind of heavy capex in the new area. And obviously, while we speak about green hydrogen, blue is the transition towards the full adoption of green, because you have a ready asset available from the SMR process or ATR process, from which, if the carbon is captured, is looked into as a blue hydrogen. So similar fashion, there is a shift towards first on the blue side. In future, as the cost parities elements come with the reduction in the cost of electrolyzer prices and the efficiency increases, long-term contracts being getting signed at attractive price point, the green adoption will increase significantly. And as we see new entrants are entering into this market space, talking about the elements of how hydrogen can be looked into, both from the value chain of enhanced margins from renewables to the molecules and to the supply of those molecules to the end consumers. So with that in mind, we we gave the example of NEOM. There are Indian oil and gas companies who are exploring partnership, and one of them, again, which is predominantly seen, is the joint venture of L&T, Renew, and Indian Oil. So L&T as an EPC and the manufacturers of electrolyzer, Renew from an generation perspective, and Indian Oil from an captive consumption perspective, is a great example to showcase how the partnership is evolving in this newer technology trends towards building a complete hydrogen ecosystem. So those are some of the examples, but let's see how let's see one example from a global energy company and one from a national oil company in our vicinity, how they are transitioning and making India as well as other geographies as a focus. So moving on to the next slide, please, Emil. So in this case, we hear the joint venture a lot about Reliance and BP. So we'll just focus on BP. And once we look at BP, they're investing a lot around blue and green hydrogen production capabilities. Obviously, their focus started with the US as US is providing a lot of regulatory and incentive benefits under the US IRA. So overall, BP has taken a target of being net zero by 2050, and they plan to advance their blue and green hydrogen focus across the 4 geographies where they have kick-started their exercise in UK, Europe, Australia, and US. In US, they already have started a lot of their projects around the carbon CCUS, because that's where the first kicker comes as a transition for existing refineries getting converted from using gray hydrogen to blue hydrogen with the carbon capture and storages. They have a plan of roughly around 15 million tons. Similarly, if you look from a Europe standpoint of view, in the UK, they already have an hydrogen hub that they are creating, in which the first focus is to build the carbon capture side of it, roughly around 50 million tons, which is an enormous amount of carbon capture that will happen. And for their refinery in the Germany, where it has been supported by Fit for 55 and REPower EU process, helping them in terms of starting the first set of green hydrogen early next year of 50 megawatt of electrolyzers, almost reducing 0.8 million tons of 0.08 million tons of CO2 per annum through that facility in their German refinery. Australia is an interesting area to look into, because Australia has both the facility of extensive renewables, as well as the low cost generation of hydrogen, because of which they have decided to generate 1.6 million tons of hydrogen and saving around 0.5 gigatons of carbon over the overall lifetime of the production that they are looking at. These are some of the elements they are looking at from a global perspective, but definitely in India, they are looking for establishing some use cases from the mobility sector, as well as in the joint venture with their Reliance entity. They are working also multiple options of adopting the green hydrogen network within the Indian context. There are certain feasibility studies that have been currently done in the UK for adoption of hydrogen powered trucks, again in the form of partnership. So that's one case study from a global player. If you look from a national oil company, in this case, we also looked at Petronas. Again, very similar. Petronas has set up an net zero target of similar like BP of 2050, and in the short term, they are looking to reduce their emission by 25% of the overall GHG, and of which in the GHG methane emissions are also looked at reducing 70%. So Petronas being headquartered in Malaysia, they have a very smartly carved out a separate entity to ensure the kind of tailwinds which is promoting towards newer energy side, as well as holding the headwinds of the stakeholders for the conventional business. That's why they created a separate entity called Gentari. And in Gentari, they're kind of building the overall clean energy value chain, in which they have 3 focus pillars. One is the green hydrogen, where they plan to produce almost 1.2 MMTP of green hydrogens. They have focused on the whole renewable energy generation, and the third element of the e-mobility. And in India, if you look at, they have extensive plan of investment. First of all, in the state of Tamil Nadu, where they have a planned investment of $4.1 billion, as well as roughly around of similar magnitude in Karnataka. They have signed MOUs, and based upon the state incentives being provided by the Tamil Nadu and Karnataka government as the initial ones, they are kind of building these facilities. And there has been a recent also announcement that from a partnership perspective with the renewable player, they're looking and working with one of the renewable energy players to to work together. They have already done an investment with AMP Energy, and they are building another setup of partnership on the renewable side for green hydrogen, while they are building another set of partnerships across geographies in US, Canada, South Korea, Japan, where there is an extensive demand for them for these low energy products to have a market for themselves. So we wanted to focus on during this discussion an overall element of one global national oil company, one local companies, but what are the key elements that we wanted to talk about is while all of these incentives are driving towards the low energy focus with green hydrogen from the overall renewable value chain perspective, the blue hydrogen from the perspective of carbon capture. But putting all together, there are few challenges that each companies are facing, which I think is important for someone like yourself who's from the similar industry would face, and especially from a context of India, as the inflation factors have kicked in. And with the inflation factors kicking in, the cost of capital is getting increasingly higher on each of these long gestational capital projects. That's one, leading to impacts on our returns and investments. And that's what we have seen, what inflation impact has on the NEON project, where the costs have increased, as well as for other projects, there is the liquidity, or what we call as winter bites, have started in terms of liquidity crunch, and the capital is being provided in a very specific manner. Similarly, the other element which then obviously lead is the cost of operation. So there are different business models being adopted by each companies to manage the increased cost of material, labor, and transportation. And the very clear example is after the US IRA. If you look at the renewable electricity cost in US, it has been increased by almost 30-35%. So as the regulatory perspectives kicks in, there is an increased cost of operation which comes naturally. So both the elements of cost of capital and cost of operations are increasing and impacting the overall, overall costing of the projects that one has to be cognizant of. And these are the that you need to be aware of. And all these newer technologies that are coming up have its own set of complexities which needs to be managed. And that's why to mitigate these risks, one has to look for then the different partnership models that work in terms of achieving the executional efficiencies of partnership. And also there are a lot of elements of discussion that has happened on the greenwashing side of it. So ensuring that there is a complete compliance towards what you're building using a compatible supply chain in your early stages of your project definition. So three factors which are impacting, and with these factors, we definitely hear news for some of this similar impact that has happened in the companies working on the energy transition side from oil and gas sector. And if we move to the next slide, what we see, while there is a lot of focus being put on the energy transition and mixed towards the conventional side, people are looking towards a balanced mix of energy coming both from the conventional basis to support the base, and newer energies coming from both renewables, green hydrogen. There are elements of risk that one has to be aware of, the cost of capital, cost of operations, and the understanding of compliance and regulatory fulfillment in this case. And once you, as a case study, if you look at in the recent AGM of Shell, they defined that their focus would be balanced approach on both the side of the energy mix, focusing while the investment on the new energy front, but at the same time to ensure the continuous reliable supply of oil and gas or energy to their customers. They will continuously balance that with the investments in the conventional basis, as well as in the investment in the new energy mix. So having said that, there has to be a resilience towards both the side of energy mix, the energy security, the energy equity, as well as ensuring that there is limited impact on environment with the net zero goals set up by all countries as well as by companies. And they have laid down their plans and we are working towards it. And movement from an hydrocarbon based to an hydrogen based economy is a definitely foreseeable future. With that note, I let Emil to talk about how things are working on the Indian context.
Thank you, Kapil, for that great intro. So maybe I'll switch a bit to the Indian context. As Shastri sir mentioned in the opening remarks that India has launched this momentous sort of campaign towards green hydrogen, right? So it's the National Green Hydrogen Mission, right? And it's set up like a corpus of around $2 billion for implementing green hydrogen across different sectors in the economy, right? And very momentous targets that the Prime Minister himself has laid out. 5 million tons of green hydrogen we're targeting, which will require maybe 125 gigawatts of renewable energy. So that's 50 million tons of reduction in greenhouse gases, and obviously the associated reduction in fossil fuel imports and the investments in the sector as well as the jobs being created as part of it, right? So this is in line with what other countries such as the US, as Kapil spoke about the Inflation Reduction Act, and the EU through its Fit for 55 and REPowerEU has been doing, right? So it's the financial outlay is around 19,700 crores, of which it has been split into two. One is what is called the Strategic Interventions for Green Hydrogen Transition Program, the SITE program, which is the bulk of it, around 17,400 crores, which is focused on two main aspects, right? One is the domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers, and the other is the production of green hydrogen or the actual hydrogen development, right? So the government is also planning details of these, which will be released shortly. But essentially, one side of it is focusing on both the green hydrogen development as well as the back-end manufacturing of electrolyzers in order to develop a robust domestic ecosystem for manufacturing as well. I think it's a similar instance to what has happened in the solar sector, where the government has rolled out PLI schemes for solar PLI. Two different tranches have come out. Similar instances are expected here as well. In terms of the R&D aspect, this is something that the Department of Science and Technology and all is sort of forerunning along with research institutes in sort of setting up pilot projects and R&D investments. This is just to show that that scale can be brought in and that such projects are techno-commercially viable, right? So it's both sides, both the supply side of it, where it's focusing on green hydrogen development and the manufacturing thereof, as well as the R&D side that is being focused on. It's in a way a comprehensive plan that the government has rolled out. And obviously, when you look at the different sectors that will go forward for the adoption of green hydrogen, it is, while it's emerging as an alternative globally as well, it is dependent on different sectors on how they adopt. So in some cases, hydrogen will be more costly than alternative, and in some cases, it is more a carrier or a step towards decarbonization. So if you look at the different sectors, especially hard-to-abate sectors as well, refineries, fertilizers, city gas distribution, steel, power, transport. So each has its own sort of propensity to switch from the existing, say, gray hydrogen routes to the green hydrogen routes. So say in refineries, it is driven primarily by the desulfurization requirement. Ammonia fertilizers, where gray ammonia switches to green ammonia. City gas distribution, where the government is planning a blending of hydrogen in the natural gas networks, and other hard-to-abate sectors as well. For example, in steel and all, there's also a requirement driven by regulation. For example, companies who are exporting steel to, say, the EU, where the CBAM or the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism has come into play, will also be looking at that as a lever for decarbonization, right? So essentially, it is going to be driven by sector, but it is going to be the more mature markets like refineries and fertilizers that will sort of kick off. And I think Shastri sir did mention the 5 million metric ton target that we've sort of set for ourselves, right? So where is that 5 million tons going to come from? So it's primarily going to be, like I mentioned, the refineries and the ammonia, right? As well as there's also an element of India being a hydrogen hub for exports, right? So when you look at locations near India, which are sort of energy deficient, like say Japan and South Korea and all, for example, example, in Japan, the focus is now more on using blue and green ammonia for co-firing in their power plants, and that's something that the Japanese JERA is sort of developing and fine-tuning. So the government is also in discussions with countries in terms of how India can become an export hub and sort of export hydrogen, green hydrogen as well. So when you look at the cost of production of green hydrogen, it is primarily the cost of renewable energy as well as the cost of the hydrogen complex, the electrolyzers and all that become key factors in determining what we call the levelized cost of hydrogen, where I think it's people have set targets of $1-2 per kg of hydrogen by 2030 and all. So in that sense, when you look at the targets that we've set for this supply being developed for green hydrogen and India aiming to become an export hub, you have to look at how we'll reach the lowest levelized cost of hydrogen, right? So if you look at what are the factors that come in? So it's an interplay, right? There are different things that come into play. One is, of course, the RE cost, the efficiency gains and technology improvements that come with reducing RE cost, the economies of scale as we have larger and larger hydrogen development facilities and as well as electrolyzer manufacturing facilities. The cost of production will also come down as scale grows, right? So, and this is sort of similar to what has happened in the solar and other renewable context, where as larger and larger manufacturing facilities come up, the cost per kilowatt or the cost per megawatt goes down. And this is sort of a trajectory in terms of how you can bring down the levelized cost of hydrogen to what we are expecting, right? So obviously there are drivers in terms of the renewables capex and opex. There are drivers in terms of the electrolyzer efficiency improvement, drivers in terms of the renewable efficiency improvement, as well as improving the capacity utilization as we move towards more and more round the clock power. As even in the recent power tenders, we would have seen the government is also focusing on tenders that have either a peak power requirement or a round the clock power requirement. And that in turn with the cost of capital, as Kapil talked about, along with the incentives that the government is planning to push, will lead to a target where we can say that we're one of the best in the world in terms of levelized cost of production for hydrogen, right? So the LCOH will have to be comparable so that we can emerge as a viable hydrogen hub, right? And for players who are looking to enter this sort of space, there are different sort of strategic options that are available across the value chain. I think Kapil spoke about, from source, generation, conversion, storage to application, the different sectors that are there. But there are different options available for players who want to enter this space, right? You can be a developer, you can be a technology player, you can be a builder, you can be an operator on the O&M side, right? And across, say, RE, the solar, wind, or storage bit of it, across the hydrogen development bit of it, across the hydrogen transmission and application to storage. So you'll have hydrogen pipelines as well as the shipping aspect of it. So there are different elements of the value chain and different roles that one can play. And based on the role you choose, as well as the partnerships you have within the value chain, it becomes more and more efficient, and you are able to leverage sort of synergies in your own existing ecosystem, right? So for companies who are existing in the oil and gas space, say in the gas space, if you already have pipelines, then that becomes an added asset for you when you're looking at hydrogen transportation, right? So again, like Kapil had mentioned in his opening remarks, it's more a partnership play where each player brings their own capabilities, and it's more building that robust ecosystem as we move towards India meeting its net zero goals and the national green hydrogen mission meeting its 5 million ton target, right? So that's broadly what I wanted to sort of cover in terms of demand, supply, technology, and the possible options. I'll now hand it over to Neetu and Bhavesh in terms of covering the regulatory and policy aspects of green hydrogen. Over to you.
Thank you, Emil. Hi, thank you so much, Emil. So I think, as we're seeing in our conversations that the industry is at a very nascent stage. And we're also looking at the fact that the driver for the growth of this industry is not purely, but it's driven a lot by the commitment that all the nations have globally agreed with regard to reducing the carbon footprint. Further financial incentives will clearly play a key role in encouraging the existing players and attracting investments by new players in the sector. So we do believe that some key policy initiatives in terms of interventions by giving tax benefits and incentive supports will further encourage and boost the sector. Some of the key incentives that can be purely covered from and considered from a direct tax perspective could be extending the concessional tax regime of a lower corporate tax rate for manufacturing of electrolyzers and for the renewable energy sector. The fact that this sector requires a lot of intervention of technology and R&D would also become very critical for the growth of the sector, and hence considering weighted deductions of expenditure that is considered in this space will also be very relevant for the sector. We've seen in the past that some kind of weighted deductions which were given for research in such sectors like pharma and all did encourage a lot of R&D in that space. So some of these incentives will certainly bring benefit. Considering a lower rate of taxability on any income that is earned through infrastructure, green bonds, or through kind of green funding in this sector will also encourage more investment of the funds in this space. And I, along with this, there's obviously a whole wish list of incentive that we would want the government to consider, and a wish list of indirect tax incentives too, which should be explored. I'm going to request my colleague Bhavesh Thakkar to elaborate further on the wish list of incentives and the indirect tax support that will further give impetus to the sector. Over to you, Bhavesh.
Yeah, thanks, Neetu. So probably what I will do is cover this into two parts, if I want to say. One is the center and one is the state, and obviously what interventions we feel is required to look at this point of time when we look at this sphere of activities, I would say. So first, looking at center, and I'll also come to what center can do better and what state can do better. So as Emil rightly said, there is already a PLI proposed for this sector. So there is a PLI for domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers, and there is a PLI for production of green hydrogen also. The overall budget for this PLI is a good 19,500 crores from an Indian context. If you look at the overall PLI space, there were 13 PLIs which were introduced, and the overall budgetary allocation was 1,97,000 crores for these 13 sectors. So green hydrogen becomes the 14th sector which has a 19,500 crore budgetary allocation to this. Though the budgetary allocation from an Indian standard looks very good, but obviously if you compare this with global countries or global comparisons, then I think so there is a lot to do. Now that was on the central PLI. What we need to take care is two things what we see on the current conditions at this point of time. If you look at the first draft of the PLI, it talks of a local value addition condition of 40%. Obviously, it is within the realms of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, what you see, and the intent of all these PLI schemes is to bring manufacturing into India and not do only the end use, I would say, assembly or something. So the whole manufacturing ecosystem has to move in India. And here I feel that a local value addition condition of 40% is important. It is required, and then only you will qualify for the PLI. But let me admit, friends, that whether it is really possible, it needs to be seen. Of all the 13 PLIs what have been introduced till now, this local value addition condition in various PLIs, whether it is solar, ACC PLI, it has posed some challenges. So that is something government will have to talk with industry stakeholders, understand the viewpoints that whether this is really feasible. So that's the first part. And the entry norms also at this point of time looks to be slightly stringent, and looks to be that large players would be able to claim this. So that is something we'll have to keep in mind when we look at the central PLI. State, before I move to state, let me give you a brief background of how states incentivize in India. So all 28 states in India have policies for manufacturing, for tourism, for IT, ITES. Now states incentives, if I want to divide, can be largely into three buckets. One will be a capital subsidy, where a percentage itself of the project cost comes back to you 10%, 20%, 30%. It may come with upper caps also of 20 crores, 50 crores. So that's the first bucket to look at. Second bucket would be a reduction in your power tariff, your electricity duty, your property taxes. So that can be a second bucket to look at. And the third bucket is certain percentage of a project cost coming back to you by way of reimbursement of taxes, what you contribute to the state government. So suppose you are investing 5,000 crores, they will say we will give you 30% back. But how will we give you back is whatever taxes you contribute to the state government, you will get that back as a reimbursement. Now, when he say taxes contributed to the state government, it will only be the SGST portion, because state directly gets only SGST. CGST and IGST goes to the central government treasury. And if it is exports, obviously it's tax-free. So why I gave this perspective is some states have already started looking at these policies. Certain states have specific, some are evaluating policies for green hydrogen at this point of time. Except Orissa, which has a sector-specific policy now, most of the states have not provided a specific policy for green hydrogen. However, they have recognized this as a thrust sector. And let me add here, friends, that this will obviously in the next 2-3 months, you will find more and more states coming up with these kind of policies, and because that will be important. So in the next 2-3 months, you will find some action in this space. And certain also state incentive are provided by way of stamp duty exemption on capital transaction, interest subsidy, reimbursement of other parts. So that are how the state incentive would be divided. Moving ahead, Emil, if you can move to the next one, and that's where we feel that wish list, what we say. So this is typically a wish list, what we want from state governments when they look at, and we'll come to the central part later. Because see, finally, whatever center decides, the project will be grounded in some state. So the state support and incentive will also be a very integral part of this whole value chain, if I want to say. So the first part, what I wanted to say is the method of providing subsidies should be dealing from taxes. So otherwise, if you say that we will give you tax reimbursement only in the form of SGST, and when we are looking at making India as a global hydrogen hub for exports, then if you are exporting, you will not be contributing any taxes to the state government. So your availment will be zero. So we should bring in a regime where we are dealing from taxes. It should not be, the subsidy should not be linked to taxes, because though there is a availment, you will not be able to actually get anything back because you are not contributing to the state government. And there will hardly be an instance where you are setting up, suppose in Maharashtra, and all your sale also is going to be in Maharashtra. There will hardly be any instance. You will be selling in Gujarat, you will be selling in Tamil Nadu, you will be exporting. So because Maharashtra is not getting the SGST portion, they will not be able to reimburse that. So that's a very important part to look at. So states should move towards the CapEx regime, if I want to say, where they say a percentage of project cost itself will come back to you by way of a subsidy, or by probably a turnover method also, where they say we can give you 1 or 2% of a turnover, similar to how PLI works. So that's what we feel would be very, very important. Stamp duty exemption and everything should be obviously provided, whether it's by the exemption mode or the deferral mode. Interest subsidy also we feel would be a very, very important component. See, most of these projects are going to be very high on capex. So they will be going for bank loans or other kind of loans. So interest subsidy, what states normally provides for textile and food processing, should be provided over here also, which will help projects to be sustainable. Now, along with incentives and along with this interest or the capex bit which we discussed, land is also going to be a very, very integral part of this whole project. So you will require land which is in acres. So that's a kind of land requirement which will be there. So there will be a provision, there should be a provision for a land concession here, whether by a concessional rate or whether by facilities, leveling of the land. All that state have to be actually on par with the central government and look at various measures where land can be easily available. And obviously, as we discussed, R&D and some parts so should be covered in these policies. So overall, there are industrial policies, But now we need to move out of the run-of-the-mill policies which are available for manufacturing, bring more sector-specific policies. And here, as I told, two of the states have already started working on that. Orissa has a policy. Uttar Pradesh, the draft policy is in the making. Gujarat has also circulated a draft policy. So those are things which we'll have to specifically focus on. So if I want to sum up this state part, I will say delink it from taxes, bring a capex kind of a subsidy, or at least bring a turnover kind of a subsidy. And land allotment and everything, if I look at the second part is the infrastructure part, land allotment or the availability of land leveling, uninterrupted power and supply. Obviously, that goes without saying that also becomes very, very important. Now, if I come to the key operational aspects here, I feel that there should be MOUs. Like if you look at the ACC PLI scheme, there were MOUs being signed between the investor, the central government, and the state government. So let's have commitment of all the three parties that investor would invest. Central government will also give the central subsidies which are there. And there should be some binding from the state government also. So that puts some pressure on them also that, yes, these kind of projects need to be grounded in time, because all these announcements happen. And after 4-5 years, when you realize that this has not actually been grounded, it will be very important that state is also equally committed to these kind of MOUs. Disbursal of incentives, obviously, in the state government regime has been a challenge. Most of the state governments, I would say. So I guess there should be time-bound disbursal of incentives. Most of the state policies would have a mandatory local labor condition, whether it is Haryana, whether it is Maharashtra, whether it is Gujarat. So because the skill sets which are required into this, we may not be available in that state, and this will be coming from different states also. So here we clearly feel that the local labor condition needs to be relaxed, and obviously single window clearance for regulatory and other approvals we feel are important. So all these key operational aspects, or if I want to use the word non-fiscal factors, are also very, very important when we look at the overall state incentive regime. And let me add here, friends, that if state incentives are planned correctly, and if you look at some of the projects, almost you can look at 25 to 30% of your project cost coming back by way of state incentives over a period of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, differs from state to state. But if really state is ready to commit a 25-30%, it will help investors to jump in faster with a better payback, add the central government incentives, and you will have a good payback, obviously, and with your profitabilities. So that becomes a win-win kind of a scenario for all the stakeholders, whether it's an investor, the central government, or the state government. So we'll have to think a bit differently on these policies and not linked it to taxes. So that was largely on the state part. And now moving ahead on the central one. So here, as Emil had said, that the scheme has been announced. Now the cabinet approval for this was received on 4th Jan 2023. And friends, it's almost 6 months now. So we don't see any action. So there was expected to be a first round by June 23, but June has also gone. So that is somewhere we feel that we need to be on speed. Industry consultation, as we discussed, we need to understand the issues of industry and try to link it with that and see whether the mission objectives are met. Present budget of incentives is much lower. I told you that this is much lower to other nations like US. Still, I will say it's a good start. You can't compare everything with a developed country with the budgetary allocation. If you look at, as I told you, the total budgetary allocation of 1,97,000 crores to 13 PLIs, and now this 14 PLI having a 19,000 crore kind of a deployment, I guess it's a good figure at least to start with. And as Emil rightly said, in solar also you had a round 2, round 3. So depend on how we get more and more response, the budgets would surely go up. So I think so it's a good start. PLIs to be designated into manner to entry allow of new players. So just now the conditions and all that, when it looks at past history and everything, looks like that it will be restricted to very, very large players. And LVA condition, the local value add condition, as we discussed, Though it is very, very important, I'm not saying we need to meet the objective of Atmanirbhar Bharat, but at the same time, let's see whether it's practically possible to have a 40, 50, 60 kind of a local value addition where we are facing problems now with auto PLIs or the electronics PLI. Points to be considered by government on the indirect tax regime, if I want to say. The present duty structure, the custom duty on import of capital goods like solar panels, etc., are quite high. So that needs to be looked into. Now, one thing is very, very important is what is the final rate on green hydrogen, whether it is 5% or whether it is 12%. So there is a lot of discussion going around that also. I guess a white paper or some kind of a memo is required over here. Because then what will happen if I am having my output at 5% in the case of green hydrogen and my input is at 12 or 18% at the case may be, then there will be a typical case of an inverted duty structure and you will have a huge blockage. So if you are investing some 40,000 crores and the input credit of that is at 12 or 18%, right? Or 6,000 crores at 12 or 18%, and your output it as 5%, then there will be a huge capital blockage or a huge credit blockage. So that is something companies or other governments will have to keep in mind. As I told, clarity on the GST rates applicable on production of GH2 is obviously very, very important. That's the start point, and keeping in mind the credit blockage and other aspects. And SEZ Act, the Desh Bill, which was also to come last September. So that is something to be extended. And for setting up production unit as a SEZ, the green hydrogen plant should be allowed. So that is also delayed by almost 8 to 9 months now. So speedier measures would be required here. But I guess the base rate, the credit blockage is something what we need to look at from an indirect tax perspective. So if I want to quickly sum up, I will say states, they need to look at policies out of box thinking, delink it from taxes, give non-fiscal benefits also like good land, leveling of land, MOUs being signed along with central government, timely disbursement. From a central perspective, I will say PLI announcement has been made, but let's have some time frame now how PLIs will be quickly implemented. Budgetary allocations with, as I told, will go up from time to time, and whether there is any possibility of tweaking any of the condition of the existing PLI which is there in public domain. And overall, from an indirect tax side, let's have a memorandum or a white paper on what will be the goods rate, and obviously keeping in mind the input credit blockage. So that was largely what I felt from both governments. We feel that there will be interventions required to really make it the Prime Minister's success story. So over to, I guess, the questions, if any, what people have in this. And obviously, thanks to all of you for giving us an opportunity, to the organizers, from Team EY for giving us an opportunity to speak in this August forum. Over to questions, sir.
Bhavesh, before you hand over, one thing you mentioned there in the slides about carbon credit mechanism to be also specified. Can you elaborate a bit for the benefit of the participants, because that is at a very nascent stage in India, and there has to be some good understanding. Maybe briefly, if you can say something. Okay, because that also may help in partially offsetting the capital requirement, isn't it?
Correct, sir, correct. So Kapil or Emil, will you be able to take this one?
Or if you suggest, maybe we can have a separate session if in case you have, on that, because that is going to be applicable for all the new energy options, actually.
Absolutely.
Correct.
So maybe we can have a separate session if you can, identify that and then come back to FIPI. Then we can, for the benefit of all because seeing the overwhelming response from the participants, about 700 registered, maybe few of them must be busy, so only about 350 odd have, are present here. Okay, so that topic also will be of great interest to the entire hydrocarbon industry.
I guess, sir, rightly as you said, the whole incentives regime and how it works itself requires a 1 hour kind of a deliberation here, whether it is central, state, the carbon credits, all those aspects which can help in reduction of the production cost. Obviously, the capex payback will obviously go a long way over here.
How they can take the benefit of the carbon credits and carbon trading, because now that ICE has also introduced the carbon trading system in their exchange. Okay, so how Indian companies can benefit with all the initiatives being taken? Maybe if you can plan some session, that will be great.
Sure, sir. Sure.
Ankurik, who is taking question and answer?
Thank you, EY team, for giving us a knowledgeable insight on the green hydrogen topic. Now we have the question answer session round, and I would request the EY team to please take forward the questions. We have around 33 questions in the Q&A box.
So probably what I will do is I will take the relevant ones and I'll put it to my colleagues over here. So Kapil, question is, any views on the electrolyzer technology maturity? What do you feel just now in India at this point of time?
Yeah, we've been working with some of our clients in the overall adoption of not just electrolyzer procurement, but also electrolyzer manufacturing in India. As we speak, 2 of the electrolyzer, in fact, all the 4 technologies which are there, alkaline, PEM, SOEC, and AIN, all 4 are having its own set of maturity technology readiness levels. The adoption from a green hydrogen perspective have been predominantly in a large scale with alkaline, unpressurized alkaline electrolyzer technology. PEM also have a higher TRL levels, but it is more specifically utilized in the mobility use cases. SOEC is also having a high level of TRL with a higher efficiencies. And there are specific vendors for it who are providing, such as Ballard, Bloom Energy. They also have been bringing the overall electrolyzers on solid oxide basis. They have few of them been already adopted in India, especially, for example, in the Leh region for generation of hydrogen through the solid oxide basis. The mix of a balance of alkaline and PEM, which is AIN technologies, it's at a lower level of tech readiness in terms of there are certain challenges. But then that has also been promising because of its low cost than all of other 3 technologies. So there is a balance between the technology readiness, adoption, and the commercial elements at which this has been adopted. So if there is a specific ask as to what kind of capital cost it is coming and where it has been adopted, we have we have a good study around the electrolyzer technologies, their adoptions, their use cases, their capex, their opex, and how the efficiencies are improving over the period of time, and what kind of new startups are also there globally. So we maintain that kind of database.
Thanks, Kapil. Neetu, one question for you. There is one of the questions that any update on the progress with the government on extension of the sunset clause for this 17.16% for products? You said rightly that 31st March 24. And if not, how is it proposed to be taken forward? What's your view, Neetu, on that?
So, yeah, Bhavish, that was a very clear industry ask this time also, with regard to extending the manufacturing date, which is currently up to 2024. I think given the fact that there has been enough representation on this matter, and we clearly recognize the fact that the sector needs this trust, I'm very positive and optimistic that we would see that the current concessional tax regime, which is up to 2024 right now, in the sense that businesses need to start commencing the operations of manufacturing by 2024, that should be extended. And similarly, when we define manufacturing, manufacturing also includes generation of power. So any such generation of power through your renewable energy resource should also be given an extension of the concessional tax regime.
Thanks, Neetu. So I guess the next question, there was also one of the questions, I guess that's for me, that what are the incentives which are given in Orissa? So as I said, Orissa became almost the first state to look into this space where they have come up with the policy. So there is a capital subsidy being given of 20%. It's not coming with the upper cap at this point, but I do feel with the budgetary allocations what the state would have, and once the operational guidelines are out, I'm sure there will be a upper cap over there. And there is also a lot of reductions or lot of reliefs being given on electricity duty, power tariff, and the various regulatory which goes into that, like transmission charges or wheeling charges. Those kind of benefits Orissa has extended. So if you talk at this point of time, I will say Orissa has really taken a lead on that one. There's one question which is getting, I guess, repeated twice or thrice. So I guess to you, Kapil or Emil. So what is your viewpoint on hydrogen fueled vehicles? How far this will be economical as compared to EV vehicles in future? So any view we have here?
So I'll chime in, Bhavesh, and then let Emil speak also. From an use case of mobility, there are two routes of technologies that hydrogen gets adopted. One is hydrogen ICE, which is the internal combustion engine using hydrogen directly as a fuel. Recently, if you have heard, Reliance has made a lot of announcement around retrofitting of certain buses and trucks, converting the existing technologies through retrofitting of them with hydrogen, which is very similar to what we have seen in the CNG case, where old vehicles have been retrofitted towards the compressed natural gas to what can hydrogen be done. The second route is obviously hydrogen to fuel cell based powertrains to help drive the engines, which has then been compared with the EVs. So from an EV standpoint of view, again, the battery technologies are getting, having its own cost parity coming up. But from an adoption standpoint of view, the hydrogen utilization for long haul vehicles, which is trucks and long haul trucks, your transportation in the marine as well as aviation is been prominently looked. And again, hydrogen could be in the form of methanol or ammonia. So if we put it in three buckets, the marine is definitely looking to transition from the existing fossil fuel based transportation, which is for fuel oil, to utilizing hydrogen in form of methanol. Maersk is already having 12 ships, which has been ordered coming up in 2027. Our own Cochin shipyard has building 6 ships, which are coming out both for defense as well as for local transportation on hydrogen. Second comes the rail. We recently heard a few rail trains would be adopted, but then again, rail is more focused on electrification. And then finally, road. In the road, the predominantly it would be use cases on the, as I mentioned, on the long haul. And then the long haul, the technology on the retrofitting of IC is more prominent than EVs, which is again, you're going to use your existing assets and get it retrofitted into using hydrogen as a fuel. The challenge where it comes is twofold. One, the cost almost have a 2x increase from the generation to the last mile delivery of hydrogen from the perspective of transportation and the dispensing, where you need to have higher cost involved in the storage as well as in the dispensing side of hydrogen, given that hydrogen light and have higher combustion. So on the safety standards, which obviously has been built by our own PASO and Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, which has been adopted in the refineries and fertilizer business also. Emil, you want to add?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it, Kapil. For long-haul commercial vehicles, it's still an evolving subject, and we see a lot of research happening there. So hydrogen fuel cells is obviously an area to look at.
Thanks, Emil. I guess the next one was a quick one, that states, while granting SGST incentive, is it possible to consider state share of SGST from IGST? Yes, you are right that as per the Finance Commission devolution, there is something which comes back from the IGST portion also to the state government. But even if after GST implementation, which was 2017, it's almost 7 years now, states have been reluctant to give the IGST portion of it. So they want to give something back, which is directly going to their treasury. So that was largely how it is. Coming back, there's also one of the requests, as we discussed, that there should be a separate session. Obviously, I will say we should have a separate one which focuses on incentives and carbon credits. Probably what I will suggest here is let's wait for 1.5 to 2 months till the time states come up with their policies, obviously also, and what's happening on PLI. Emil, there's a question on what's the difference between blue and green hydrogen, and I guess now it is more on the technical side. So Emil will request you to take it from here.
Sure. Thank you, Bhavesh. So blue hydrogen essentially is the gray hydrogen that has carbon capture, and the carbon in that process has been captured and stored or utilized in a certain way. So green hydrogen is hydrogen that is produced through renewable sources. That's the basic principle between gray, blue, and green. And obviously you have, say, pink hydrogen that is produced from nuclear sources and other variations as well. But it's primarily gray, blue, and green that you look at. When we speak about green hydrogen, it also ties in with India's goals of net zero and 500 gigawatts of non-fossil ambition. So that sort of becomes a route for us to reach a low carbon alternative and help reach our renewable goals as well. So that's essentially why there is so much focus from the government as well as the private industry on switching from, say, gray or blue hydrogen towards green hydrogen, right? Maybe I can just pick up some of the other questions. I think these are for the rest of the panel as well. Kapil, to you, for green hydrogen or ammonia, are Indian players primarily looking at domestic or export or a hybrid? And any concern that if they start export now and all the production is absorbed by domestic demand, will that be a problem, or how do you see that playing out?
Great question. I think, while we're working with a lot of our clients, the initial focus is to get the export market, because that's where the clients are ready and customers are ready to pay premium and have a proper pricing and contracting structure. While domestic market is in a kind of wait and watch as we speak currently, purely because of India is a price sensitive market where if predominantly if you're changing from what it has been utilized in the refineries and fertilizers, it is at the scale, and that scale level needs the domestic supply chain and the domestic price point to be comparative with the alternatives. There was a great amount of interest when the natural gas prices were on the higher side almost 6 months back, but now with the LNG prices softening, there is a big cost differential that is there, which can then be supported by looking into specific use cases. So, for example, some of our clients are adopting the green hydrogen in fertilizer, as well as in cement, in steel, and chemical industries, where the hydrogen at a smaller quantities is being brought from the generation point to their consumption point, and we have almost 18 contracts that we have seen have been signed on direct adoption of green hydrogen as a feedstock or as a fuel in the recent context that we have been observing in the market.
Thanks, Kapil. So I think the other question that we had was in terms of offshore wind being a source for renewable hydrogen. I think that's something that a lot of countries are also considering, given that India is also launching its first tender for offshore wind. So countries across the globe, say, for example, Netherlands is focusing on offshore wind to green hydrogen route, and they've announced a policy and incentives for that. So that's something that countries are actively looking at. In the oil and gas sector, we see also companies that have the sort of deep sea or maritime expertise where they have oil rigs. The upstream companies especially are also evaluating offshore wind as an investment, right? Maybe question for you, Kapil, in terms of any RE certificates or the certification requirements for green hydrogen, how do you see that evolving in the Indian market?
No, so absolutely. As one of the things been asked is how does the carbon market is going to shape up? So under Article 6.2, green hydrogen has been one of the predominant areas, and definitely as per your fulfillment of RE on an RTC basis. The RTC is your round the clock fulfillment towards your green hydrogen production is the overall value chain that has to be looked into to say it is completely 100% green. And based upon that, and there is a complete process that our team within EY work towards certifications, as well as ensuring that what is generated leads to help in terms of generating the carbon credits. Again, that's a big subject to be worked upon and discussed. A lot of is in the currently in the draft stages, which would be, completed at what Bhavesh mentioned within next 1 to 2 months time. And the process would be very similar in the case which was earlier in the voluntary basis, but from an India standpoint of view, as Article 6.2 becomes mandatory, would be more prominently traded within the context of India. What is the price discovery? It has to be looked as the trade starts happening.
Right. There's also a question around city gas distribution and how hydrogen blending can work in that context. Maybe you'd like to share something around what companies are doing in this space.
Yeah, so I think already somebody did mention from IGL perspective, they have recently running a process for one of their units. I don't want to reveal much, but then that experience would talk about anywhere between 2 to 4% is something which has already been tested in Indian context. GAIL has done that for some of their own setups, captive setups within the employee residences, and where they have done as much as 5% of blending. From 5 to 10% is something that is going to become mandatory in the consultation that is happening with Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Till 10% blending, it is safe to do that amount of blending on a volumetric basis. Anything beyond that needs to have a further understanding of the MOCs or pipeline, the pressures, the compositions, the quality factors, etc. So, in fact, there would be a specific need of further investigation studies before that blend can be done. So, by 2030, there could be a mandated 20% blending that can come through. Again, these are part of the draft circulations that are happening with the government taking all those directives, but nothing has been made mandatory. But on a voluntary basis, some of the city gas distribution companies have started engaging and working, and we are working with some of them as we speak, based again on our global and domestic experiences.
Right. Thanks, Kapil. Maybe I know we're almost at time, so maybe last question for you, Bhavesh. I think this is more with the tax regime for hydrogen and natural gas. While Kapil talked about blending within the hydrogen network, I think there's a specific question. In UP, there's a 10% input VAT and 12.5% output VAT on CNG, with an 18% GST on hydrogen proposed. How do you see that sort of evolving as hydrogen blending picks up in the network?
Yeah, and that was, Emil, the exact issue which I discussed actually. There is a lot of deliberation going on that whether this would be 12 or whether this would be 5. Just that UP VAT covers CNG, but I'm sure green hydrogen will not be in the VAT, which some of the states, it's in the state domain. This will be in the central domain. This will be GST. So we'll have to look at whether they come at 5 or 12 and a clear-cut verdict on that, because otherwise it will result in credit blockages and stuff what we discussed.
Understood. A very pertinent point as well, I think. So there are a lot of questions still, but maybe we can organize a separate session for that. I'll probably hand it over back to the folks at FIPI to sort of conclude as we're almost at time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, EY team, for addressing the questions. I would now request Mr. Vivekanand, Director of Finance, Taxation and Legal at FIPI, to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you, Pankari. And thank you, EY team, for partnering with the FIPI for a webinar on such an important topic. And thank you, Mr. Kapil Bansal and Emil Thomas, for giving an overview of the international and national developments in the area. The message is very clear that the countries and the companies, all are almost significant of them are targeting net zero target by 2050. and sharing the example of the BP and Petronas, and also the L&T and IOCL gives the actual things happening at the ground level. And thank you, Madam Neetu Vinayak and Bhavesh Thakurji, for sharing the clear thoughts on the incentives required for fiscal and non-fiscal area for development of this particular sector. And special thanks to Madam Neetu Vinayak for taking a lead and making it possible to happen this event. And also the participants, I thank you for their active participation that shows by the more than 50 questions we have received. Many of them have been answered and probably many of them may be repetitive, so significantly have been answered, but some may have remained unanswered. And thank you to the Pankhuri and the EY from the EY Archana and my team Shijo and Sumit who have worked behind the scene to make it possible. Thank you very much for your time.